It's a good sign that we're already laughing before we even get started. So we're
You
Uh,
push record.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Why? Why do you want? What did you want to say? Go ahead and say it. Don't be scared.
Oh no, I mean it's all good, man. Our ducks are not in a row, but hey,
Oh
we're
no.
ready to roll.
well, just the conversation we had before we started, which is funny, and maybe this is good for the people who listen. Um, y- y- the, the struggle between just having a conversation about an idea versus getting into a text and going into teaching mode, and it's distinctly different. Although the both of them have positive um, sides to them. You know what I mean? They both have value. But we're talking about today like a text, so it's going to be more. Let's look at the words. Let's look at the story
Yeah,
instead of just talking about ideas. So
yeah, yeah.
It's kind
Like
of like let's open up the Bible.
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let's do
Finally,
that.
yeah. I've been praying for you guys.
yeah. So the purpose of this, like we've already said, but I said when they're like, "Hey, what are we doing?" I said, "Well, let's talk about um, how this changes the way you look at scriptures and how you start showing." And they're like, "Well, did we do that last time?" Yeah, but we didn't use a passage. So today, what we want to do is use scripture and show how this process can change the way you view scriptures, and which really unlocks a lot of interesting. I think uh, about a study I did with a group this past Tuesday, and just going through the Lord's Prayer. I mean, just the idea of disciple making unlock some things that you wouldn't unlock any other way. So
Yeah,
you just read right over it when you think about it. And so what we're going to do is talk about the feeding of the 5,000, um, a miracle that's in the one. I think I'm right about this. You guys back me up or correct me, but it's the only miracle that's mentioned in all four gospels.
yeah. Other than the resurrection, yeah,
Yeah, other
it's
than
the
the
only miracle
resurrection.
that Jesus
Yeah,
performed. Yeah,
it's the one miracle that Jesus did, and the fact that it's in all four gospels should say something immediately.
yeah,
It's the fact that all four writers would decide this is important enough to put in. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think early on when I heard somebody say that to me, I was like, yeah, it's amazing. Like, look how many people he fed. But I'm thinking, wait a minute, he raised the dead. You know what I mean? Like in comparison, I mean, although it's a neat miracle, in comparison, it's not to the level of raising somebody up from the dead to me, or opening the eyes of a blind
well,
man.
it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, yeah. So when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, why did all four of those writers like focus on this passage, like this story? Although it is an amazing miracle, there's got to be more to it than that.
Right,
Just the fact that it was memorable.
right.
So,
So
and something else to think about too is the way what precedes and what follows each one is slightly different with a different twist because
Yeah,
we were talking about that before we started, and so there's a unique paradigm that each one of the gospel writers is writing this specific miracle with. Like there's a unique point that they're making, not that it's I mean the miracle is the miracle, but what's inside the miracle and how it's embedded in the different four accounts of it, I think is pretty amazing in itself the way
yeah,
that it's put in. But
yeah,
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
no, and I think Derek, you got and Jason, you're making my point on they're giving me grief. Would have been nice to know what we're talking about before we actually start talking, and and but I like the spontaneity of the conversation instead of mulling over. Hey, I need to say this. Hey, I need to see that. This is stuff. It really is just flowing out of what we've already discussed 1,000 times, like you said before. Um,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I like the freshness of it. And they're like, boy, like they were like, hey, you know what we were talking about last night, and you got to think about it. And now we don't get to think about it. I'm like, no, I didn't know. I'm on the same train you guys are on. I'm like, oh,
Bill,
okay.
Bill, It was like, meet us at the mall. We're like, we're at the mall. Yeah, you'll figure it out.
Just get
We're
there.
just wandering around
Just
looking for him.
wear something bright colored.
That's right.
So where was the first time you saw this, Bill? Like, where was the first? I mean, you know, not that you need to remember it, but like, where did that passage come alive? That miracle.
Um, it probably came alive right after I got into this process. I mean, it was, and that was one of the things I wanted to bring out too. What's the traditional view of this miracle? You know, what do people usually say about this miracle? What I,
Loaves and fishes, baby. God, we need to multiply this food right here.
yeah,
Yeah, I can't even think. I can't even think anymore about what the traditional. I hadn't heard it in so long. I'm trying to think what the general consensus is among.
what is it usually God will multiply and supply the need? Is that it?
Yeah. I think Jesus meeting our needs is kind of usually the typical, from what I recollect, and
Or
it's
or
usually
if
kind of
you've
how it's
got
presented.
if you've got very little, don't worry about it. God will take it and multiply it.
Yeah.
That's a good way to say
Yeah,
it.
I'm putting on my traditional
Well, for His
denominations.
glory too,
Yeah,
right? We need to add that in there.
yeah, yeah,
Well, for me, it was always like, if it's just about Jesus doing that, like if it's just about Jesus feeding people, providing for our needs, or showing the aspect of his power, or showing an aspect of his character, or showing, like, I always thought, well, if that's the case, and a gospel writer has limited space. John talks about all the miracles that Jesus did. If we wrote them all down, the books of the world couldn't contain them. So it's clear that he was doing miracles all the time,
right.
like ridiculous amounts of time. But then the gospel writers choose to pick this miracle, and if it's just about showing his power, or showing his intention to take care of us, then what's the reason for having a whole other miracle that says almost exactly the same thing in the feeding of the 4,000?
Hmm. Yeah,
Right
yeah,
now, all four gospels don't record the feeding of the 4,000. I think only two of them do.
yeah.
But it seems like if that's the point, you kind of just double down on the point, and it seems like a lot of waste of real estate in a letter or a gospel text that you could pick from millions of things to pick from. The fact that you would pick this and then repeat it almost, in maybe a different setting, seems a little odd to me.
Right.
So that's what kind of started making my mind kind of question, like, what is it, what's going on here? Like, there's got to be a bigger idea. And we had talked about the idea of the bread and the multiplication of bread before, but I think when I started putting those two ideas together, and asking, why did these writers do this, especially Mark does something in between them, which is fascinating to me, and we can talk about it or not. But there's a huge idea about perception, and about our assignment, and about what God expects, and the strategic way we do it. All that stuff comes into play when you start thinking about that question. Why would he spend that much time in two different accounts?
Right.
And
So
you see it best in Mark, but it does take a while to see it, because it's stories that are linked together,
right, right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, a
And for
lot.
me, that was what really changed stuff.
One thing that this process will do is slow you down, make you a more critical thinker, and also stop looking at these stories in isolation
Mm-hmm.
as you begin to link things together, because you know when you figure out our rabbi, who's Jesus, we're trying to be more like him. We're trying to understand how he thinks, how he flows, how he processes. And so you start reading and listening to the gospels over and over and over again, and you start to see these things linking up. And there's something. We're gonna really, I do the thing I just said we shouldn't do, and that we're going to look at a story isolated in itself, but
Yeah.
what's around it is as vital as what's in it. Where did the writer plot this in,
Yeah.
and for what reason? So, and I'm not saying nobody ever thought those thoughts before without thinking about disciple making. I'm just saying that disciple making focus and hones your attention in a way that uh, I've never had anything else focus it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we
Let's talk just singularly about like this the strategic idea behind the miracle,
right.
like before. Like that's kind of for me that was what kind of really unlocked the start of this.
Hmm.
Now stuff comes along later when we start talking about numbers and the Jewish meaning behind them. You know, Ray Vanderlyn does an amazing job
Yeah,
about talking about that
I
idea and
agree.
those numbers, which really helped me. But before even that, the strategic purpose of how Jesus did the miracle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Versus what we think he did.
Right.
Like most of the time when people read the text, they think Jesus, gave each of the guys a basket with a little bit of bread and fish in them, and they walk down a hill, and every time I reach in the basket, there's more there. Like
Right.
that's not what the text says.
No.
Like it's very clear that the miracle was happening from the hand of Jesus himself. He was breaking it and kept on giving it to the disciples, and they would carry it.
That's
Does that
interesting. You
make
would say
sense?
it like that. That. I guess we've swam in these ideas for so long. I can't put it in my head that somebody would think that it was multiplied out of the basket of the disciple.
Well, most people that's how they relate it. They when they kind of like act it out,
Uh
they're
huh.
always like, "Wow, look, there's more in there," and they just keep getting
Really?
astonished that the basket never ends out. Yeah, that's what I've always. I remember
Huh.
being in a Bible study one time, and there was a girl or a lady that was talking. Like she's like, "Yeah, it's amazing," and I said, "Well, that's not really what it says." And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, it's actually Jesus is the one who's doing the miracle and giving it to the disciples, and when they run out, they got to come back." And she's like, "Well, do you see that?" And I started looking at him like you don't really see it in English, but if you look at it in the Greek, I think it's even in the uh, we talk about the what's the name of this Bible? Discovery Bible having the Greek kind of tools in there to help you see it, but it says Jesus kept on breaking it and kept on giving it. It was like present tense. It kept on happening. So it doesn't like it ain't like he broke it one time and gave it to him and then it was out of the picture.
Right.
He's the one that kept on doing it.
Right.
And in the text, you may not see that, but in the Greek, it's obvious.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Um, and that brings up well we had a debate on what passage to start in because each one has its unique ideas. Um,
Yeah.
but just looking at all of them, and we're going to play off the assumption that the people that are listening understand what we're talking about a little bit. Um, but you're right. You just explore the different ways that Jesus could have done that. You know, and how would we do it? That would be a nice
Yeah. Yeah.
contrast.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Red
know,
line. Yeah.
if you were going to feed 5,000 people plus women and children, or if you were going to feed 15,000 ish people, how would you do it? Well, you would make an assembly line. That's what we do. That we're really great
Yeah.
at.
The most efficient, the most efficient way.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which what's the disadvantage to that? You know,
Yeah. I mean, I know what
Well,
I
who's
mean
excluded?
personally.
huh?
Who's excluded in that process?
Well, it's not the people that most people would say. Like they would think, well, gosh, the guy at the end of the line. No, but it excludes somebody much more important than the person at the end of the line.
Yeah.
Say it, somebody.
One who's carrying it, the one who's doing the work of bringing bread to him. I
Yeah.
mean, the
The one
disciples
that's
in the
learning in
story.
the process of
Yeah.
training. I mean, the one that is.
I think when you see that Jesus, when you keep it in mind, and here's the lens, you always keep in mind that Jesus is training his men, that everything he's doing is training his men. All the miracles he does is training his men. All the speeches and all the teachings are not for the crowd. They're not. They're always for his men. Now, did people benefit outside of that? Absolutely. But like in the John 6 passage, it's very clear that Jesus feeds these ungrateful sods, and what do? They chase him around the lake,
Yeah.
and Jesus completely says why they did it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not
Eat your
here.
belly full.
You're not here for me. You're not here to find truth. You're not here to get in on what I'm in on. You're here
Yeah.
because you got a free meal, and you're looking for another free meal,
Is
and
it
huh?
is it John that says they didn't see the miracle or they didn't? Is that the one
That's
that says?
Mark.
Huh?
I think that's Mark.
Well, I guess I've always when I've read that, you just kind of saying that, Bill, it's kind of really helped me, maybe kind of give me a glimpse into something I never really thought about. But we always think, yeah, they come over because they just want to get their belly full again, and he does say that. But he says before that, he says because I'm trying to find it. Sorry, I was
That's
a
okay.
different one. Uh,
It's a good thing we don't mind being disorganized.
yeah, right.
And while Jason's looking for that, that force to make him king in John 6:15
Yeah.
has always been, like, for me when I've taught this in the past, that that desire that comes from man's heart, not
Right.
God's heart, right? That desire to push Jesus to be something he didn't come to be, and to take his focus away from his men, because if he would have become king like they wanted him to, yeah, he would have dodged the cross. That's not why he came, but those men would not have been finished in
Right.
their training, right? And then, I love how John forces the disciples out into the water, for the safest place they could be is in the middle of a
Yeah.
storm.
And
And then that's why, like, that's the connection of the feeding for me, is what's the safest place to be in that moment of testing for Jesus and the disciples. Safest place to be is in a storm that has the potential to kill you,
mm,
sink you, right?
yeah.
I mean, I just, again, that's kind of off, but that is the,
No, but you're making the
I'm
connections.
filling in the silence for Jason. But
Yeah. No.
yeah.
No,
Well, it
but
was
but
it was it was John, the one I was specifically looking for. It says this is the next day, when they come after he's fed them and they find out he's left and they go run around to the other side. And he says, they're asking, how did you get over here? And he says to them, this is John 6:26. Jesus
that's
answered him and
after
said,
the storm too.
yeah, truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. In other words, you enjoyed the meal, but you missed the point
yeah.
of the meal. And we always think, and I always in my mind, I was always thinking, well, the point of the meal was to show his miraculous power, but it wasn't.
Mm,
Because if that was the case, then why put in Mark the feeding of the 4,000? So what was the sign? The sign was says, "This is how the kingdom is going to advance in the world.
mm,
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to. This is how I'm going to spread truth. This is how I'm going to, relay the kingdom ideas from here furthermore. And if you want in on that, then by all means come. But if you're just here to get your belly full, you're just here to get what you can out of it. You're missing the whole point.
and he proceeds to offend them,
Yes,
to
very much.
scatter them,
Yeah, yeah,
and he
and that's
offends it. He goes to the nuclear option,
yeah,
Jewishly in a Jewish speaking way, and to the point where he looks
yeah.
around at his guys, and they must have had the look of, holy crap, this guy's psycho.
Yeah, the eat my body, drink my blood thing. Yeah,
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 yeah. He goes
yeah.
nuclear on them, and
Well, I always read that and I say, oh, somebody forgot to tell Jesus how to read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence
yeah,
People,
yeah, yeah. He was
because he's not doing a good job. Yeah,
he
yeah,
was kind of like the word we like to make up of Ash Holish. You know,
yeah, yeah,
he was a little bit he was a little bit abrupt. He was a little
yeah.
bit coarse.
I'm
Uh,
glad Bill opened that can today and not me.
Well, ain't that crazy though? And we don't think of Jesus this way. We think Jesus wants everybody, come, everybody. It don't matter about your motive. Just come, just come. And Jesus is going, dude. If you don't have my motivation, it's best you stay home.
yeah.
Like, wait, what? Like, I'm
Well,
going to offend you, and I'm not going to care if you get offended. I'm not going to like, oh no, I'm not talking about my physical body and drinking my blood physically. That's heretic. Like, that's not what I'm saying. He didn't adjust his message to them. He didn't go, wait, well, you misunderstand me. He
yeah,
let them think what they
yeah.
thought, and he let them have it,
Oh,
and
you
just
think
let them go.
that? You think that? You think okay? Bye. Yeah. Let that
Yeah.
fester in you like a splinter in your brain.
Oh gosh, man.
It, it,
Many of his disciples walked with him no more.
so that right there, I mean that I want to pause for a second because we can get excited and move on to the next big statement, but I want to point it out to the person that's listening that's going, how, what do you mean this stuff changes the way you look? Listen to the way we're looking at this. We're looking at this as we're looking for strategic movements. We're looking
Yeah.
for intentions behind it. What was he trying to accomplish, and how does Jesus's attitude toward this change the way we operate? So this isn't just a story for God will provide all your needs and He'll multiply your little bit of effort.
Right.
Here's give God your little bit and He'll multiply it into a bunch. Yes, that's true, but not in the way
That's
you
not the point
think.
of this. Yeah, that's
Right.
not the point of it.
A lot of times we're the crowd, right? We're looking for what benefits us. They didn't want him to be king because he was such a great leader or so wise. They wanted him to be king because they didn't want to work.
He can supply our needs.
they
Yeah.
just they just wanted somebody that would let them belly up to the bar and have no consequence of providing anything.
Yeah. No
Well, and
value.
then even think of like going back to a kingdom idea with this is, everything they did was through the Roman Empire. Like what they were getting, it was the monopoly of the Roman Empire. And here they see this Jew that steps onto the scene, and it's like we don't have to trust in Roman Empire
Mhm.
anymore. We got this guy that can lead us out here and feed us something. Let's kind of like the disciples at the Mount of Transfiguration. They see him do these miracles and he's transfigured and they're like, let's build three temples right here, one for
Yeah.
Moses, one for, and it's this they're looking for an immediate fix, and Jesus didn't come for an immediate fix. Jesus didn't show up to fix our mess. He showed up more than that to train us, to train the few, the proud, right? To train the few, and then from there those few would permeate the heart of God. But I just was never really thought of it like that until listening to you guys talk about that idea. I'm not thought about it like that with why they would be so inclined to make him their king, but I would think that would be one of
Yeah.
the reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. This is
Like you said, it's like we don't have now. We're not only are we out of the Roman under kind of out from under them because we got a guy that can feed us, and we're not we're not dependent on this evil empire. Now we've got this king. Oh, he might be the Messiah, and then Jesus literally strips all of them butt naked and shows them what their heart really is because he says right before you say that, right before you read that, Jason, Jesus says, labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for the meat which endureth for everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give you, for him hath God the Father sealed.
what's he mean labor?
I mean,
Gosh, we just read
so
right over that kind
so
of stuff.
so
Like
now,
there's work involved with this.
okay, so I'm going to speak directly to the listener, whoever you may be, the one person that is actually listening to these things. Listen to how it changes the conversations that you have with people. Okay, no
yeah,
longer are we just tra la laing through the scriptures, looking for daisies to pluck. Now we're looking at some real life changing, real meaty stuff that has everlasting consequences. So, so
Yeah, along that line, I think there's one of the Gospels records of this story. It says, we've heard it before, but it's like they're out there in the middle of nowhere, and they're like, Jesus, man, you need to send these people away because they can get something to eat. And he says to them, you give them something to eat.
mm,
And I've always thought to myself, the impossibility of that assignment is what drove that whole thing.
yeah, that is one of the biggest ideas. I remember that idea got me kidnapped.
Mm. Yeah.
Literally
Yeah.
kidnapped one time.
I
So
remember that.
I was in India in Hyderabad, and I went. We had one night in the uh, at this church as we were on our way through there, and so they said, "Hey, would you like to, somebody like to speak?" And so I said, "Nah, okay, okay." So
Just wrong.
okay, all right, all right. So I did the feeding of the 5,000, and that was one of the big points that I brought out. Was he took this situation, these people that were hungry, with no resources, they had very little resources, and he put it on them to feed them. And I said he turned it around, and the people come up afterwards and said, "We've never heard anything like this before. We don't know. That's never the way we heard this taught or preached or whatever." And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "We want to hear more about this." And so they proceeded to change my schedule to make us stay.
Without you knowing, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Canceled our tickets, rearranged our travel, and decided that we didn't need to go where we thought we needed to go.
You got to stay here. Yeah.
I'm like, what? First time I've ever been kidnapped, you
Yeah.
know, because I
Yeah.
taught something. But that's the power of these ideas, and
Yeah.
I think it makes me sad to think about the people that are never going to hear anything like this, and not because we're saying it, not because it's us, because we're not the only ones saying it. There's thousands of people out there with these ideas, but
Thank God you didn't say millions, because that would have been way off.
well, it probably is in the millions if you can combine all the network. Uh,
That's true. Yeah.
so, but there,
One thing right here, man, that I've never thought about
what?
until like right now when you made that connection. But John 6:27, right? Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for the meat which endureth for everlasting life. So let me ask a question.
Hmm.
What kind of laboring were the disciples doing at that moment?
Oh yeah.
Oh
Yep.
yeah,
Like what kind of labor was theirs? Because that, of course, is a part of what Jesus is referring to.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
For sure.
This idea that I'm going to be the answer to all your problems and to fix your current situation. That's death. What
I'm
did I
laughing
just tell
because
people? What did I just tell every
yeah,
every believer?
yeah. I'm chuckling because most people think when Jesus shows up, everything's going to get easier. They literally got harder.
Yeah,
Like the labor that they had to go through. Like imagine, like we just, I heard this somebody say that there's a guy that says, we read stories in the Bible to the point where we don't even get shocked by them anymore, and it's the lullaby effect. We just read right over it, and we think 15,000 people get fed. Now, assuming right, every one of them has to be fed by one of the 12,
hmm,
right? I mean, if there's 12 people serving 15,000 people,
right.
how long is that going to take? Like, I don't think we ever stop to think about the amount of time and the labor because it says they were on a hillside
Right.
and he's got them sitting down in groups of 50 and 100. So these
Yeah,
guys
there's
are, these
strategy
guys are,
too.
yeah, these guys are moving up and down this hill, going back and forth to Jesus, to the people, to carrying
Right.
these loaves and fish. Again, they're not carrying all they need, and it just keeps multiplying in their hand. They're going back and forth
Right.
constantly, and you imagine the physicality of doing that.
Well, I think Ray Vanderlyn does a good job of showing the terrain at one of the
Yeah,
feedings. I think
yeah,
it was the feeding of the
yeah,
4,000, wasn't it?
yeah. Well, there's a couple places they said this could have really only happened here because of where it was in
Yeah.
proximity to the Sea of Galilee, and so it's not a flat area. It's pretty steep terrain.
It's like
So it would have been difficult.
going up the stairs of a stadium.
At least, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So if you do the math, which I just did on my handy dandy calculator, each disciple was responsible for at least 1,250 people. I mean,
Wow.
not 12. Yeah, 1,250 people. Okay, that is incredible, but doable if all you're doing is distributing.
Okay, well
Yeah.
let's ask this question. It might be way off base,
Hmm.
but did Jesus say don't use anybody else to help you with this process?
He has them sit down.
But would the disciples had have gotten another person
In
to
my
help
mind, the fact that he put that in there, he says have them sit
this
down,
specific? Yeah,
is a very strategic way of saying they're a passive in this process. You're the activated person.
Mm.
Now,
which
eventually, we hope to get them activated, but in the process of this, they're the ones passive in it. And we know we've talked about this before. When someone shows up in my life, they're passive once they show up.
Right.
Like I'm the one carrying the intention until they get eyes open.
Right.
So for a while, they're just receiving, they're receiving, they're receiving until eyes get up. I know that's a little cryptic if you're not in this very far, but if you're in it a little bit, you understand what I'm saying there.
Right.
but think about Moses and Aaron, and think about the weight that God brings him into that leadership role, but then the weight that is to be handed off, right? I mean, this is like this it
Yeah.
didn't just show up in the four accounts of the gospel when Jesus feeds the bread. This, I mean, when Jesus breaks the bread, this is all the way back. You can even pull Abraham into that with the multiplying my generation as many as the seeds
Hmm.
Well,
of the hands of the seeds.
it's very much a callback to Moses, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because he said, I mean, the story of Jethro, his father-in-law, he's seeing Moses handle every bit of this judgment between the people, all from day to night. And he comes in like, "What are you doing?" And Moses is like, "Well, I'm acting as a judge between these people's issues." And he says, "This is going to wear you out. You're going to have to," and it says literally raise up people that will be over the captains over 50s and hundreds. So very much a Jewish person would have heard sit down in groups of 50 and 100. They would have thought immediately of Jethro and Moses' story.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's very clear that Jesus is saying, "Look, you guys individually are going to be responsible to to carry what I'm saying to these groups." And yes, they're eventually going to get involved in the process, but in this story, he's setting it up for what it would look like down the road. Like, so I don't go out looking for 15,000 people. I look for the next guy that I can engage to say, "Hey, you're responsible for everybody, but you're going to get it in small groups
Yeah.
over time. Like, it's not going to come in a multitude. It's going to
Well,
come little by little."
yeah. This is not going to be. I mean, okay. So again, we're going to speak to the people, whoever might be listening now or down maybe 20 years from now. Um, you have to get immersed into the details. All right. So the very first, how do you do things like this? You've got to get the information in your noggin, right? So you got to read this over and over. You got to study it. You got to rip it apart. You got to get the details down, notes, teaching it, relaying it, sharing it with people to get it in your cranium. Then you can start moving around in it, almost like you've put enough data in the computer to create a 3D model, and then you
Yeah.
can stand in it and look around
Look around. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
observe. I chuckle when I say stuff like that. I chuckle at the one time I'm sitting there talking to you, Jason, one time, and I'm talking about something, and the way I'm talking about it, you go, "Where are you right now?" Because you knew I was immersed.
Well, the way you kept looking up a certain way, and I said, "What are you looking at?"
Yeah,
Because I understand that concept. Like, I understand, because that's the way the Lord taught me early on. He said, I've called you to teach, and I'm like, I don't know how to teach. And He said, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna read the Word, and I'm gonna put you in the story, and the story's gonna come up around you like a 3 dimension,
yeah,
and all you have to do is look at what you, or just say what you see.
yeah,
And I still, to this day, that's how I teach.
yeah,
And
exactly.
I got, I'm even pointing in different places of the room because in my mind, I'm pointing out what I see in my mind.
Right,
And it's that you got to have those stories in your head enough to be able to do that.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you think you're going to get that information in your head, and then uh, start talking about it um, by yourself, good luck with that. It's
right.
you need at least one other person to kick that around, to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be able to bat those ideas back and forth, to say something outrageous
Yeah.
and wrong, even wrong, have
Yeah.
a wrong understanding about it or wrong conception, where somebody
Yeah.
says, I don't think that's the deal.
And be okay with being wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, be
Yeah,
willing to
the
change it.
details of the text is really what pulls these things, and we just, like you said, we just read,
Hmm.
we gloss over these stories so much that we never really stop to think like why certain words are there, why certain details are there. Like I love John 6 because it gives a lot of these little tiny
Yeah.
details, and as you're walking through these things, you start to realize, hey, um, he's pulling ideas from other text in the scripture. You know, we talked about the 50 and 100 sitting down in groups. Like those details are in there for a reason because he's calling back to stuff. And and I think for me, when I was reading through this story, trying to understand the strategic focus of it, what really jumped off the page for me is the motions that Jesus did,
Hmm.
and he does it the same every single time. So these motions, I'm gonna get ready to say, he does them in the feeding of the 5,000, he does them in the feeding of the 4,000, he does them on the night when he's betrayed, when they break bread and do what we call the Lord's Supper. He does it when he's talking to the two guys on the road to Emmaus. It's always these same things, and he says he took, which means he took the loaves. It says he blessed, which means he blessed God for the loaves. And then it says, then he broke them. And then it says he gave them. So he took, blessed, broke, gave.
Right.
And that's the same pattern every single time.
Right. So now we're getting into another section of this lens. I'll
Yep.
put it like that, and that is the elements themselves.
Yep. Yep.
What are they? And not just the elements, but what did you do with the elements? And how did you proceed with it?
Yeah.
And that those in itself has a lot of information that you can use in this process and strategically. So let's just give an example here. Let's talk about what is the bread. What's the bread representative of?
Well, I would add, uh, it says how many loaves. So you've got, I mean, obviously we hear the word bread and loaves, we think the word of God, truth, right?
Right.
But it specifically says there are 5 loaves.
Yeah.
So that number is very specific.
Yeah.
Like, and so based on the geography where this is happening, this would have been a very Jewish area. So when a Jewish person hears 5 and loaves, which represent truth or God's word, they hear 5. Immediately, they're thinking something very specific.
Yeah.
Like, and if you don't know that, that's a detail you just miss. But to a Jewish person, when he hears 5, he thinks Torah. He thinks Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He's thinking the word of God to Moses. Like that's the foundation of their faith. And so Jesus is taking the Torah literally and blessing God for giving it, and then breaking it. In other words, bringing revelation to it, or bringing His understanding and teaching to it, and then giving it to His guys.
Right.
Like that's the whole point of it. Like at the end of the day, that's what he's saying. He's saying it in a very Jewish way, but he's saying, "Look, I'm taking the word of God, and I'm unlocking it for you. I'm teaching you God's perspective, God's understanding, God's heart, God's lens to see it in, and I'm giving that to you. Now you take that and you give it away."
So that's one that so the bread is very because the bread is representative of a couple of different things. It is
Sure.
that. Then when you mentioned the last supper that we call it, but when Jesus
Mm.
was about to be crucified, he said, "This is my body."
Yep.
So the bread is also representative of Jesus, and the breaking. And I think about you all the time whenever you say every time we have a revelation or we absorb a new idea or God reveals something to us, it's Jesus being broken.
Yep.
It's the breaking.
Yep.
So his why was his body broken for us, right?
Yeah.
But also, not only is the bread representative of Scripture or truth and Jesus, but it's also representative of us because we in identification with with being a co-heir in with him, the bread becomes us. Just like we talk about with the parable of the sower, where the seed is the word, but the seed is Jesus, but the seed is also us. So it's like a multi-faceted
Right.
idea.
Right. 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 Yeah, I think you're talking about Jesus as the Word, the Word made flesh. I mean, that's the clearest picture of that right there to me. Is this is God's Word spoken and then fleshed in the world, and then unveiling Himself to His men, not to the crowd necessarily, but to the men.
Right.
And the need set up the need set up the the need of the people set up what God was trying to do.
Right.
Right. So like the hunger of the people forced forced the issue. Like I tell guys when they show up to me and they're like, I want to learn the word. I want to I want to start learning what you're talking about. And I say, well, brother, I appreciate you're here. And I appreciate you're sitting in that chair. I said, but the minute you sat down, it became about the next man. And I said, and the reason you're here is because someone else has a need. They're asking God to make Himself real to them. So that's what has put that spark in you. Like their prayers for seeing God's truth is because God's gonna He's gonna equip you for that. So
Which is something
that's
that
how I see this.
anybody that's listening to this, you're the potential answer to someone else's prayer of,
Exactly.
I need someone to show me what this is about. I need some
Yeah.
help. I need someone to invest in me. I need someone to teach me, train me. And you're the answer.
Yeah.
And it becomes not about you. And there, and what I think is really cool, and it just gives you that, I don't know, the sense of everybody wants to be wanted, right? Everybody wants to be needed. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to be relied upon, or guys do anyway. Um, so the idea that God takes you as bread, thanks God for getting you, and breaks you on the behalf of somebody else. I mean, that idea right there would not be seen any other way, I don't think, unless you see that your job is to reach the world and invest in others.
Yeah. And I think when you tell people this, they get nervous. They're thinking, I don't have the revelation yet. And I'm like, that's not your job.
Mm,
Jesus is the one that's bringing it. He's the one that's breaking it. He's the one that's opening up to us. Our job only is to distribute.
right.
We're just carrying it to the next person. That's all we're responsible to do. So the revelation comes at His hand.
Mm,
And when I need more, I go back to Him. And then
yeah.
I go again to the next man. And then I come back to Him. And I go, so like it's all on Him
Right.
as far as the truth is concerned. But it's on me to take it.
So we're jumping all over the place, but and that's not a bad thing. But think about the strategic nature. I mentioned it a while ago, but let's explore the ideas. How could have Jesus done this differently? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What could He have done? He could have said, "Okay, disciples, watch this," and said, "Okay, everybody line up, make a 15,000 person line," and he could have started breaking and giving. And how long would it have took him? I don't know if it would have been less efficient, more
Right.
efficient.
He's the only singular one doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, if he was the only one. Well, he's the only one breaking it to begin with. So
Right.
who, I I don't know, but he did. He chose
We're getting ready
definitely.
to go to the institution.
That's not where I was going, but no, but
Oh, I mean,
it's true.
let's push it a little further. Like it's Jesus, right? He's doing a miracle. Why not just have him like show up in their hands? You know
Mm,
what I mean? Just like the manna, put it on the ground for everybody to pick up. Like,
wow,
why didn't he do it that way?
Mm-hmm.
Which would have been biblical.
and faster. Yeah,
So I never thought about that before. Why
That's
didn't he put it down on the ground like manna?
yeah.
yeah, yeah. That would have been
Or
very
was he?
Jewish.
Or was he?
What?
Like he was. Like he, but I don't know. I'm just thinking. Like I don't want to get off on a crazy rabbi trail, but I'm just thinking in my mind. Like I mean, he was he was using a way to distribute it back then that made sense for where they were, but it's still a miracle. Jesus still doing it, or God's still doing the miracle.
Well, how much of what Jesus did made sense to the people, like as far as, even thinking about Lazarus being dead and he waited and they didn't understand, but ultimately because he did something that they couldn't perceive in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
they ultimately could look back at and be like, oh, that's why he did that. Or and like for intention, it goes back to his intention was greater than their understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times have we said that over 20 plus years? I mean, his
Right.
intention was greater than their understanding. And then it's like, okay, well, if you don't know what Jesus's intention is, other than, yeah, he came to die on the cross for the sins of the world. Hallelujah. Amen. Thank you. But
Yeah.
then we know John 17 happens too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And there's like this pairing of the work of Jesus, which is I got to die, but I got to train before I die.
Right.
So what about us? I mean, I again, I'm just thinking even differently now, putting pieces together, and then trying to help the listener understand like what's driving Jesus to do these things that are out of the ordinary, but that are connected to the Torah, connected to the Old Testament. Like, what's his intention? And yeah, it might be to die for the sins of the world, but he's going to finish the process of discipling his men before he's before he's gone. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Like
Yeah.
it goes back to the intention is what's driving everything.
Okay.
So
Well,
what's his
Well,
intention with feeding?
back up.
well, it's the same way for us though. If we don't reproduce, we're just like the guys who say got our bellies full and we're shut up again and get our bellies full again.
Mm,
That's
We're
right.
just like them. If we're not passing on the bread that we're getting, we're being the same way.
yeah. Exactly.
So hello, Christian, sitting in a church Sunday morning every Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. What are you doing with what you're getting?
Yeah.
If you're not distributing it, you're being disobedient. You're being like those guys were, getting
Yeah.
your belly full.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Bill, about go back?
Yeah. You got you. Well. Okay. So go back even farther than that to where Jesus takes them, goes out into the wilderness, and intentionally starves his audience. He intentionally takes them out, knowing what's about to happen, and then he's creating a problem on purpose. That's pretty.
Well, let me back up a bit, right? So, because I think we assume Jesus knew what was coming. I mean, you can say he's God, so he knows everything, but I don't know that he operated that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it says the reason they went out there was because the guys had been so busy they didn't even have time to eat. Like that's busy. Like if you're moving so much every day that you ain't got time to slow down and have a meal, like that's crazy. And so Jesus is like, let's pull away after John gets beheaded.
Mm-hmm.
Let's regroup. Let's kind of like get a. It literally says to go out and take a like rest.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that's what sets that up. And then they come out there to meet him. And so I don't think it was necessarily him saying, "Hey, we're going to go out here in the middle of nowhere." But yes, Jesus will use every bit of. Does that make sense?
On a couple of the accounts it says that he looked at them and had compassion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Every time I see that, I think that's Jesus coming off script.
yeah,
Like he's got a purpose and he's heading somewhere,
Yeah.
and his compassion moves him offline because he sees a need, and he's just so moved because his heart is so much for brokenness. Like to me, is like that's an audible. That's a change of plans.
but when you look at Jesus is he has to see at least this thing unfolding.
Yeah.
As he's sitting here, like he's healing the sick. He's some people think he may have been doing some teaching, who knows, but he's ministering to the people, and he has to realize that they're out in the middle of nowhere, and there's not going to be enough food, and it's almost like okay, so some passages Jesus initiates, but some I think it was kind of they came together and they were like, Jesus is like, and the disciples are in agreement almost immediately. Hey, these people need something to eat. We need to send them away. We need to, because our resources are very deficient to handle this kind of influx of people.
Yeah.
They recognize, and Jesus recognizes it too. That's why he says in passages, you give them something to eat. And it's major emphasis.
I was
Right.
getting ready to ask you as a
You-
major emphasis,
You
right?
give them something to eat. And the disciples look at him and go, are you smoking major amounts of crack? Have you not? I'm sorry, Jesus. I didn't realize you just got here. Have
Yeah,
you
yeah,
not noticed our resources? Which is every believer, and this is where the lens really turns on, is because we as believers are as deficient in feeding the multitudes of the world, just like the disciples were feeding
yeah.
that crowd. I mean, they literally, the only way to feed them would have been for them to devour them physically.
Yeah.
Just and even what is it in John where Philip says, you know, a year's worth of bread,
200 denarii
yeah, which is
is not sufficient.
almost a year's worth of work, would only give each person a mouthful, even just a little bit. So I could myself, I could work myself into the dirt, and never even give these people enough to give them an hors d'oeuvre, right?
An hors d'oeuvre. Is that your southern way? Say
Yeah,
that.
I think
Your hors d'oeuvre.
the French call it hors d'oeuvre, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But enough to give them just something small to make them even hungrier. And I think we look at, and obviously what we're getting to is that, and I'll just hit the punchline, is the feeding of the 5,000, feeding of 4,000 is a world impacting miracle. It's a picture, it's a backdrop of Jesus trying to show his men, I'm going to use you to feed the nation and the nations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to be the source. Don't forget that. But I'm going to use you to feed the nations.
Yeah, which we see often. Like he's the one who provides the bread. We're just the distributors of it.
Right.
And maybe that's why the numbers have to be so extravagant. Maybe that's why there's
yeah.
got to be 1,200 and whatever per person, because
It's got to be
you've got
undoable.
to feel the weight
Yeah, yeah.
of the impossibility before you bring
Now
the Spirit of God into that.
It's not an impossibility. Then you don't need a miracle. You don't need God's mind or God's way. You can come up with 1,000 other ways to do it, which is what we've tried to do. That's why
What
you got to
churches
keep
do.
the world as your focus. Because if you minimize it, then you can do whatever you want to. Try different
Right.
ways to reach. But if the world is your focus, there's no other way to do this.
Yeah.
You got to have this kind of strategic.
Well, that connects our conversation about the debt, right? Can you imagine one of the disciples? He goes, "Okay, have them sit down in groups of 50s and hundreds," and he begins to hand them food. And one of the disciples goes, "Hey, man, this is beyond me. I can't run up and down that hill that many times.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I got a bum knee. I got a bad back. You know, I haven't eaten myself. How in the world am I going to do this?"
You imagine just sitting down in the group going, and the guys come along, the other 11 come along. What are you doing? I'm just want to eat.
Right. So believer, if you feel inadequate, hallelujah. That's great. That's a good place to be. That's not a bad place to be at all. Because inadequacy is the only way that you're going to get to the point where you can actually be used. Because then you're always going to go back to the source rather than trying to, and I mean, if I was those guys and I was chasing this back and forth, I can see myself running with these baskets going, I'm eating myself.
And there ain't no guarantee that didn't happen.
Oh yeah, I guarantee it happened.
You brought up the whole point about the 200 denarii, and and Derek had said earlier about labor for the bread. And I'm thinking, man, what a contrast. Like one side, Philip's thinking physical labor can't get this done. Like I can work for a year and not be able to feed these people, right? But
Right.
Jesus invites them into a very specific kind of labor, to be sure. Like they're physically laboring, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how many times does the church's focus is, hey, we need the resources to be able to meet the needs of the people. That's how we'll get this done.
Right.
We need more money. We need more people. We need more whatever. When Jesus is going, that's not how this is going to happen.
Mm.
This is going to happen with a spiritual idea.
Yeah.
This is going to happen with a spiritual work. And I don't need your resources necessarily. I'm not saying they're not valuable, and I'm not saying God can't use them, but that's really not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is the people who are willing to distribute.
Mm. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
So let me ask this question. So how do you transfer the debt? How do you I know what I'm asking, but
Yeah.
for the sake of the people that are having that question, like they feel the debt, and it's like then it's like they now need to figure out how to transfer the debt. Like how would you transfer the debt?
Well, what Jesus?
Processes.
Well, like what you're gonna follow the model, right? How did Jesus transfer the debt of that crowd to his men? He says, "You're responsible.
So
Yeah.
assignment,
Yeah.
right? So
You're responsible.
assignments,
Yeah.
the responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're
Well,
responsible."
and you can't minimize. Like I think we talked about this in the debt part. It's like, look, what was God's mind? Well, God's mind was not to come and show himself just to a small group of people and just save Israel. His mind was to bring whosoever into the kingdom of God, and that was all nations. That was his heart. And so Jesus shows up with the exact same heart. You know, for God so loved the whole world, right? That's that same heartbeat all the way through. Well, if I'm taking on Jesus's heart and character and life and all that stuff, then I can't minimize what he came to do.
Right.
He came to give all nations, so I have to have all nations,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't pass that debt off to. I can't like come out from under it and say somebody else is responsible for it. I've got to maintain that responsibility. I've got to maintain that weight of going. I'm the only one doing it. Now I know that's not true, but that's how I got to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Right.
And so when I sit down with somebody, I'm doing them a disservice by not transferring that debt to them. Because if I don't transfer that debt to them, they will never need to know the exact way to do this.
Mm.
Because if you don't have the all nations, there's other things you could do. Like if
Right.
you say, "Hey, I just want to reach my community," you could do that in 100 different ways. But if you personally have got to reach all nations, there's really only one way you can do that,
Yeah.
and that is through multiplication of people.
Yeah.
So the debt is vital.
Yeah.
So that impossibility of that task set up this miracle.
Right.
The impossibility of my task, all nations, sets up God's miracle in my life
Yeah.
to make me a distributor of His truth
Right.
to whosoever sends in front of me, and then they
Capture.
become and they don't come just to eat like those guys did. They got to see the miracle. They got to see that you got to see the sign. You got to see this is what it is. You're being invited into this process. You're not a participant of just eating now. You're a participant in distribution.
Right.
And until you do that, you miss it all. Like the miracle just totally escapes you, and you'll never get in on what God's doing. It'll always be about your belly and what you're getting out of it.
Boy, ouch. So
So that
go ahead. Go.
no, I was just going to ask another question on behalf of if there is a pastor that is listening,
Mm-hmm.
which I doubt there is, but I'm not going to assume. That's assholeish. So the crowd, which usually shows up on Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
do you throw the weight of the world out for them?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, that's the most kind thing you can do, even though it feels really, 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 really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what was Jesus doing that day? He was trying to reframe his mind to think like he thought and had the strategy and focus that he had. Well, how much would you do that? Well, let me put you in a situation where you feel it,
Mm.
physically feel it.
Yeah.
They still didn't get it at that time,
Mhm.
but they started to.
Well, I mean, put yourselves in the disciples. You know, you got this big crowd around. Even if you had 1,000 people, and somebody said it's your responsibility to feed them, okay, you're going to have an Oshisen moment.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to make it's going to give you butt pucker. Your butt's going to eat your underwear, however you want to say it, right? And if you're not having that as in this process, then you won't have any fuel in the tank. And what I mean
Right.
by that, you won't have any stay power. You won't have any kind of of ability to weather the storms that are about to come.
Yeah. Well, because you're going to move out from you're going to substitute
Yeah,
God's focus for something
you're gonna
smaller
olay it.
every
You know,
every time.
it's gonna be like a
So
Every
bullfighter.
the and the reason I'm asking that question about like the corporate institutional setting is because if we do go in with that mentality, the temptation to be made king is going to be overwhelming. Because if we put ourselves in that place as Jesus, and we like, I'm like, there's a trap in that.
Mm,
There's a trap in that if you don't understand the intention of Jesus.
mm,
Because I've been trapped by it. And
hmm
the trap is, okay, well, we've got a crowd. Isn't that enough? But then ultimately we see what the crowd is made of at the end of John 6:6:6, which I think that's phenomenal. That happens to be the mark of man, right? But it's that's when and I believe there's the majority of that crowd does not follow him any longer because it's the same ones there that are that. So I you have to be comfortable with the process of weeding
mm-hmm.
with the intention of Jesus.
Right.
Well,
And the weeding is the intention of Jesus, which is the world, not this group of people. And it can be harsh when the group of people start seeing the pastor's intention. It could be harsh for them. It could be like, well, we wanted the best for you, and you don't act like you give a crap about us because you're focused over here on these guys. You don't, all your intention is with them. Just kind
well,
of making it more of a practical reality from my point of view. If there is a institutional person that listens,
well,
that is a trap.
well
Can be.
let me kind of make it it's worse than that because it is
I was
because
trying to be nice,
if
but
if the perspective of a person listening to this who is a pastor says it's a trap for me to put in that position, and I say it's worse than that, you're trapping every single person sitting in that pew. You've
mhm,
convinced them it's okay to sit in the 50s and hundreds and just eat.
Mm. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
So the trap for you is bad, but the trap for everybody else, unless you're pushing this
yeah,
world impact debt, you are literally saying to them, it's okay for you just to come and sit and eat. Now, I
right,
know there's seasons of time you need to rest. I get it, but you understand what I mean. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
these people
oh yeah,
sitting in a pew week after week, we are not doing them any service by saying it's okay just to come here and eat.
Right.
yeah.
Well,
We're
That's
literally not.
you're discounting what has been invested in them.
Yeah,
What has been invested in them is much more than somebody that just sits and gorges themselves
yeah,
on truth.
yeah.
You look at them and you go, well, they're this or they're that, or there's this deficiency, or there's this disqualification in that person, or I look at them and I go, how in the world could they do anything? Or well, that's not your job. That's not your job to evaluate. Your job is to let them know. So is everybody in the congregation going to jump in on this? No, they're not. Most of them are going to olay it like a bullfighter. It's going to be, oh, thanks, that was for the guy behind me. Oh, thanks.
Mm,
They really good at dodgeball. but
yeah.
but that one person that goes, crap, I'm responsible, then you become the most important person in their life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking about somebody's ability to do this. Like, how hard is it to go, thank you, here? Like, at the end of the day, that's all God is asking of us is to pass on what we get.
Right.
That's it.
Jesus.
Now, yes, you can get better at it. You can be, more skilled at it. But at the end of the day, this is not hard to do.
Jesus gave each disciple the mirror test before the thing started,
You're
and
breathing.
yeah, hey, if you can fog a mirror, you can carry a basket, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that now I just gave everybody the qualifications for being involved in the disciple making process. Can you fog a mirror?
You can carry a basket.
You can carry a basket. Well, you don't understand my problems. Don't care.
You know.
I'm gonna be real jerkish at this point. Don't care. Everybody's got them.
But when the problems start coming out, that's the excuse. Move on
Yeah,
to the next.
yeah,
Because man, we can spend our whole life making excuses for why we don't want to do this or why we can't do this.
right.
So I mean, it goes back to the impulsivity of the guys that Jesus chose, that first group of guys,
Mm.
that they were just about so dumb that they just saw a rabbi coming after them, and they're like, I don't care what's at stake. Yeah, I'm going to leave dad sitting in the boat with the nets.
Hmm.
I'm freaking out of here, dude.
Yeah,
This guy thinks I got what it takes.
yeah,
And then the next thing you know, 2 years down the road, Peter, Simon, and the others are just in that first four groups of men, Peter, Andrew, James, John, right? They're
hmm,
getting their tail ends handed to them because they, of course, is just like, I'm there. I ain't got nothing else to do. I'm in this thing.
yeah.
I'm ready to roll. This guy has come to tell me he thinks I've got what it takes. And then from there, yeah, it's just
Yeah. Well,
useless.
mentality that works best in this process is the mentality of jumping off the cliff and going. Now, where are we going? That is the best mentality because
That's
because
fun.
you're
It's
you're
day one.
because you're in committed in to the
You're
point.
not. Yeah, you can't change your mind now.
Yeah, you're committed to the point of death, and you signed a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Imagine jumping off the cliff and go, I don't know that I want to do this now. Well, you're in it, buddy.
I think gravity's going to
There,
make that decision for you.
there's no going back.
Right.
Isn't it amazing that you can't go, like, how many times have we said once you see it, you can't,
Honestly, yeah, yeah.
Which is exactly
and
what they said when in John 6:66, and he looks at them. He says, "You're gonna go away too," and they're like, "Where are we gonna go?" Like, there's nobody else that has the word of eternal life.
There's
Like, we realize you are the only source.
there's nobody else
There's
as
no other
flipped
option.
out as you are.
We
So
don't like it either. We don't like what you said. We think it's
yeah,
crazy. We don't like the. It gets really bugging us as much as it did them.
yeah, we do. Yeah, we're with the crowd on this one.
Yeah,
They're
yeah. We're
they're
siding on them.
they're
Yeah,
Skippy, but we're stuck. We're stuck.
yeah,
I love
yeah.
that.
and we have no ability. We in ourselves have no ability to get people stuck like that.
No.
Right. That there's that again. It goes back to, like, I keep thinking about Marty, and when I met with him yesterday, we had a guest that came in. It was good, but it was good to see the comparison of a guy that I discipled 10 years ago compared to one that I've been just discipling for about a year and a half, and there's a big difference. There's a
Mhm.
big difference, man, and it's encouraging but discouraging. But I, in my own ability, could have never have got a man like Marty.
Hmm.
Mm, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I could have gone through, and if God would have lined up 500 guys to choose, I would have probably never have chosen him. Like,
Mm,
it just had, so I'm saying that to say that even to the beginning point of this, even at the beginning part of this, we don't. we're just passing bread along for anybody that shows up. And the ones that I love to look for now compared to what I used to look for are the ones they might be carrying a basket, but they ain't got crap in that basket. It's empty.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the basket here, right? But the ones that are empty, that don't have, they're not full of themselves or full of religion, that you can't even, when you break it, they don't even have room to receive the truth that you're given.
Mm.
But this dude showed up with nothing,
Yeah.
zero.
Yeah.
And that is something that changed my perspective of disciple making for the rest of the life that God's going to give me, is that he showed up that way. And then it's like God saying, now, dummy, not that I can't give you people that are already filled, right? Like
Right.
that can happen too. But this is what I do. And this is when I do my greatest miracles, is when somebody shows up belly full, empty, destitute. They are in desperate need. Let me work.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. That 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 is huge. That is there's so much in that. There's so much that we could waller around
Yeah.
in that, uh,
Well,
which
I
is
think a
like
lot of times we want guys that show up with a basket full. The problem is they show up with their own
yeah.
bread, like what they've the traditional mindsets and the religious ideas, and those guys are really, I mean, they may be gifted or talented or skilled just in natural abilities, but those guys usually don't are not very effective. They don't stay the course. Their natural success keeps them from becoming a empty basket. That, like, in my mind, I think of baskets as my ability to carry something,
Right.
right? So, and it even talks about it. We won't get into it, but the baskets changes from the feeding of the five to the feeding of the four, but the capacity of those baskets increases dramatically.
Yeah. Depending
When
on who you're
the
going
story
for.
change. Yeah, so I don't want to get off on this because that's a whole other thing, but
Another hour.
yeah, but like that's where I see myself, like as as my vision got broader and more aware of the guys that God is calling into this, and that'll, I can't always predetermine it, but I can kind of tell, like, I have some hints now. If someone shows up and they have a lot of skills, more than likely they're not going to come. They're just not going to come because I don't have the, as I get better, maybe I can draw on more people that are higher skill. But most of the time, you're looking for people that are frustrated, that are kind of, what we call discontented with the thing, because those guys are like, this ain't working for me,
Right.
and I don't know why it's not working for me. I really would like to. I really want to follow Jesus. I really want to honor Him, and I don't know why what I'm doing is not working. And so, yeah, my cat. And so, when someone comes into this, they show up with an empty basket, and you're not only putting bread in it for them, their capacity to carry it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as you give that debt away, as you focus on the
Right.
world, as you focus on the assignment. That's impossible to do without.
Yesterday, with the two questions that I asked both Tony and Marty, um, like what led you to be discipled? What led you to where you're at today? And both of them agreed with the exact same thing. They said this. They said they were asking in their mind, there's got to be more. There's got to be more to this life. So they were disenfranchised. They were discouraged with,
Yeah.
disenchanted, all this right?
Mm.
Like the church wasn't doing it for them. Their wife wasn't doing it for them. Their kids wasn't doing their vacation. Nothing in this world, because God was instilling that. I think that's a God divine hope that God can only puts in us.
Yeah.
Thank God I had that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
discontentment, the divine discouragement. Those both of those guys said that that's why I'm here today. Is I realize there's got to be more. And so we're looking for the ones that are saying that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a like a spiritual subliminal thing going on in every believer, that we know what this is supposed to do. We understand it's supposed to feed, that the truth of God is supposed to feed the nations, and that it's supposed to go to the ends of the earth. We understand that, I think, subliminally in our spirit, right? And then we look around at what's going on and we go, you know what? This is supposed to feed the nations, and it's not even feeding the guys in front of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
They're
and
malnourished. Something ain't right. Yeah.
something's wrong, something's missing.
Yeah.
And so when you start looking at it like Jesus looked at them and went, hey, you know, yes, they're hungry. Yes, they need this. We're going to alleviate this, but how you think this is going to go ain't the way it's going to go. Just I remember having a conversation with a group of people one time, and they were talking about this missionary type person that was going after a people group of 16 million. Okay, which is a lot of people. I don't discount that. And they were like, "Hey, isn't that good enough, Bill?" And I was like, "No, it's not." And they were like, "Man, you're being a jerk. You're being this. How can you say that? That's a lot of people." And I'm like, "I agree, it's a lot of people, but it's not the world. Anything less than the world is too little. It's too
Yeah.
small." And they were like, "God, you're a jerk. God, you're this." And I'm like, "I'm. Why am I the jerk?"
Right.
I, how many people would say Jesus was the jerk? Well, how dare you point out that 15,000 people are hungry?
Yeah.
Well, what would it take to shift that guy's perspective? I mean, 16 million is an impossible task just as much as 7 billion are. Then why minimize it? Why not push it out to the end? Like, why, you know what I'm saying? Like, because if you can, in my mind, I'm thinking you got a task that's out,
It settles the debt. It to
right,
it's like I look around and I'm gonna speak from a pastor standpoint, and I know that reaching the needs of the victims of the tornado that were literally a mile from our church,
right,
literally, that there is something there that is good in God's kingdom to help them
yes,
in their needs, in their time of need. But I realize that's not the fulfillment of the debt that God has placed on us. But people feel relaxed and comforted by the fact that they're doing that.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
it scratches that itch. Yeah,
yeah, it's like it settles that little bit of an understanding of, well, we got to impact the world, because that's what Pastor Derek always says, impact the world, right? And it's like that's not fulfilling anything. It is, but to not be the butthead, I let them think that they get what they get, but then realize they're going to come back and they're going to be as empty as they were before they went and did that, because ultimately it's not the purpose and the plan of Almighty God. It's not it's not where Jesus says, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And
Yeah.
that's
Those actions are more byproducts of the
right,
process than they are
right.
the point of the process.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
Yeah, like we talked about before, Jesus is going on a path, and then he sees somebody and he's moved with compassion. That pulled him off his purpose because he saw a need and he felt drawn to help. Right? Like, but I can do ministry till I'm dead and gone, and it'll never pay down this debt
right.
one
yeah.
cent.
That's
It
right.
just won't.
Yeah.
Like, so for me, when I think about it, I'm like, there's ministry to do. That's a byproduct of this lifestyle. My main motivation is multiplication of men to the ends of the earth,
Yeah,
and any ministry that comes out of that is bonus.
Yeah.
Now, will God use, like, I use ministry all the time as a way to emerge guys. Like, I go do something to serve because I want to and because I want to help, but at the same time I'm doing it with the intention of, all right, Lord, there's got to be bigger purposes than just giving a meal or a handout or a help. Like, where else is what's the next what's the next guy? Maybe I'm finding him here,
Yeah.
in the middle of this brokenness. Because
Mm.
next time the brokenness happens, we need to have another guy who's in place that can help.
Mm.
So, yeah. Anyway,
Well,
that's
I
all
think
I think.
I think this is a good discuss. I think we need to pick this back up in a week or more um, after I get done being a heathen.
Well, make a good list of what we talked about, so we pick it back up. We'll know what we said.
Make a
Especially
good
if it's gonna be 10 days or
Oh
longer.
yeah. It'll be a while.
make a good
Yeah.
list. I like
Bill's,
that.
Bill's gonna spend a week in the honky tonk. He's gonna forget everything he said.
Here's the thing. Did anybody take notes today?
Of course not.
But did you have to look at your notes to say what you said?
No.
Because
Nope.
it's. I mean, how good gracious. I mean, I look at the text and I go, oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
Now,
oh yeah, oh yeah.
let me remind everybody how we started this. Hey, we just decided this morning, 5 seconds before we start recording, what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's
And
awesome.
this is the only thing I got in front of me.
So,
I got no other notes or.
That
Like
was
it's not a it's not a brag. It's just like you
No.
get
No.
so saturated in his word and these truths, and
Right.
you just like I don't have to have a sermon. I can look at the passage and just recall
right.
like all the things that I've learned and God's taught me from it. And
If
man,
they
we just picked the surface of this
yeah,
thing.
if they ever put me in physical jail, I doubt they're going to let me take my notes.
Right.
I doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah, I might be able to get a little New Testament. That'd be about all I'd need.
Yeah, if
I
I
can
could
make it
get a
work.
little bit of a launching pad, yeah, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these things have got to permeate your very being to where the next time somebody says something about the feeding of the 5,000, you go, oh,
So what you're saying is, Bill, that you have a basket full,
yes, a hamper.
which is what happens at the end of our little story. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces.
Yeah.
Like if you're willing to serve and distribute for somebody else, you're never going to go without. You're always going to have bread in the basket
We're
to
gonna
give
have,
away.
and we're gonna have to pick this back up because I think there's a lot of really good things to talk about in this, and we need to talk about the feeding of the 4,000 in conjunction with
Don't you
this.
threaten me, boy.
Yeah. I was just thinking
I'm calling
about the
you
boat
out.
ride.
I'm calling you out.
Thinking about the
That's
boat ride.
one of my
Mark.
favorite stories.
The boat
Yeah,
ride.
one of my
I mean,
favorite
I'm just
little.
thinking about the boat ride. Mark. What's he pissed off about? What? Oh, we forgot. Right. We forgot the bread.
He's upset. Mm,
And then that's why Mark is such a good.
yeah,
Um,
I love that whole section. It's phenomenal. Like yeah.
Yeah, we'll pick it up.
Yeah, isn't it good we don't have to work up excitement about the scripture?
Mm.
All right,
Nobody
gentlemen.
hit the pulpit today.
Huh?
Nobody's banging on the pulpit excited today.
I did that Tuesday.
Okay. Good.
All right, later.
See ya.
Good job.